Today, we're diving deep into the life of one of the most notorious, ambitious, and flat-out violent criminals of the 20th century, Pablo Emilio Escobar Gaviria. This is a story about staggering wealth, unthinkable brutality, and how one man held an entire country hostage to build his empire.
Okay, let's just start right here with this one quote, because honestly, this is the key to understanding everything about Pablo Escobar. This wasn't just some clever line. It was his mission statement. It was the driving force behind his entire war against the state. And it all came down to avoiding one single thing: extradition to the US.
So, how did a guy like this even get started? Well, to really get who he was, we have to peel back the layers of myth that he's so carefully built around himself. Let's get into his early days.
You see, Escobar loved to push this rags to riches story. He wanted everyone to believe he came from nothing, that his empire started from, of all things, a humble bicycle rental business. But the reality, it was a completely different story. He wasn't poor. His family was middle class. His dad owned land. His mom was a school teacher. He didn't rise from poverty. He dropped out of school and chose a life of crime because he saw it as the quickest path to the power he desperately wanted.
He started out small, with petty scams, smuggling some cigarettes, stealing cars, but he was smart, and he realized pretty quickly, why am I risking jail time for pocket change when there's a massive opportunity just sitting there? Medellín was already a hub for the cocaine trade. Escobar decided he wasn't just going to be a player in that industry, he was going to take it over.
And this brings us to the very heart of his operational philosophy. It's a simple, two-word strategy that was as brilliant as it was barbaric, and it's exactly how he built a global drug empire. Plata or plomo, silver or lead. This was his one and only business proposal, offered to everyone from the lowest cop on the street to judges and politicians. The choice was brutally simple. You could accept his plata, his silver, a massive bribe, and just look the other way. Or you could face his plomo, his lead, a hail of bullets. With that simple, terrifying choice, he corrupted and terrorized an entire nation.
Now, the plata wasn't just for bribes. Oh no, he was much smarter than that. Escobar used his fortune to buy the loyalty, even the love, of the people of Medellín. He poured millions into the city, building schools, hospitals, soccer fields, even entire neighborhoods for the poorest families. To them, he wasn't some drug lord. He was a hero. They called him El Patron, the boss. And that public loyalty, it became his most powerful shield.
And then there was the plomo. In 1979, Colombia signed an extradition treaty with the United States, and this became his absolute obsession. Why? Because you can't bribe or kill your way out of a supermax prison in the US. It was the one threat he couldn't control. He tried to get around it, even got himself elected to Congress in '82 for the immunity, but he was exposed and forced out. His response? He had the justice minister who exposed him assassinated. That kicked off a campaign of terror so savage that by 1986, he'd actually forced the Supreme Court to cancel the treaty. But he was far from done.
In 1989, trying to kill a presidential candidate named Cesar Gaviria, Escobar had a bomb planted on Avianca Flight 203. It detonated mid-air, killing all 110 people on board. 110 innocent lives. And his target, Gaviria? He wasn't even on the plane. That was the horrifying scale of his violence.
Bombing a civilian airliner, that's a line you just can't uncross. This wasn't a game of cops and robbers anymore. This was an all-out war, with Escobar using terror on a scale nobody had ever seen before, all to bend an entire country to his will.
He teamed up with other drug traffickers to form a group they called Los Extraditables. Their one and only goal was to force a ban on extradition. They declared war on the Colombian state, targeting anyone who stood in their way: judges, police, politicians, journalists. Car bombs became a daily fact of life. By early 1991, Colombia was a literal war zone, averaging 20 violent deaths every single day.
The country was just bleeding out. People were exhausted by the violence. And the government, led by President Gaviria, the same man Escobar tried to blow up, finally broke. They offered an unbelievable deal. If the narcos surrendered and confessed to just one crime, the government would literally rewrite the Constitution to ban extradition. And just like that, through pure terror, Escobar had won.
So Escobar surrendered, but his version of going to prison was, well, it was unlike anything the world had ever seen. This is where the story gets truly absurd.
He didn't just get to choose his prison. He got to build it himself. He called it La Catedral. the cathedral. It was a luxury resort that just happened to be called a prison. It had a view of his entire kingdom, Medellín. The guards, they weren't guards. They were his own hand-picked assassins. The actual army was forbidden from coming within miles of the place. Inside, he had a bar, a disco, a gym, a jacuzzi. He threw massive parties, ordered in food from the best restaurants. It wasn't a prison. It was his fortress.
And from inside this gilded cage, he kept running his multi-billion-dollar empire without skipping a beat. But he got arrogant. He got sloppy. He suspected 2 of his top guys were stealing from him, so he had them brought to La Catedral, where they were tortured and murdered right there, inside the prison walls.
Okay, that was a step too far. Even the Colombian government couldn't ignore that. A prison can't be a private execution chamber. So they decided to move him to a real military prison. But when the army showed up to transfer him, he just walked out the back door. He vanished into the night, kicking off the biggest manhunt in the history of Colombia.
And now we get to the final chapter. Escobar was on the run, but this time was different. The hunter had finally become the hunted, and he had enemies closing in from every single side.
There were 2 very different groups hunting him. First, you had the official guys, the Search Block, an elite Colombian police unit getting help and training from the US DEA and CIA. They were trying to play by the rules. And then you had the unofficial hunters, a terrifying vigilante group that called themselves Los Pipes, which stood for People Persecuted by Pablo Escobar. This was a death squad made up of his rivals and his victims, and they weren't interested in a trial. They wanted revenge.
And Los Papers didn't play by any rules. They took Escobar's own brutal tactics and used them right back at him. They hunted down and killed his lawyers, his accountants, his hitmen. At one point, they were killing about 6 a day. They firebombed his properties, burned his priceless car collection. They were systematically dismantling his entire operation, hitting him everywhere it hurt.
And then came the end. On December 2nd, 1993. It happened fast. First, the call. A desperate Escobar calls his family, and the Search Block intercepts it. They triangulate his position to a regular house in Medellín. Then the siege. The house is surrounded. There's no way out. He makes a last, frantic attempt to escape across the rooftops. But this time, there was nowhere left to run.
In a short, chaotic firefight, Pablo Escobar was shot and killed. The triumphant message crackled over the police radio, a message of relief for a country that had been terrorized for more than a decade. Viva Colombia, we have killed Pablo Escobar.
And so, the reign of the king of cocaine was over. But his legacy is a true paradox. For the thousands who suffered his violence, he was a monster, plain and simple. Yet if you go to the neighborhoods he built, some people still see him as a kind of saint, a Robin Hood figure. And that forces you to ask a really difficult question. How can a man responsible for so much death and destruction also be seen by some as a hero?